Welcome back to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues daily until the complete revelation of Mashiach ben David, that is Messiah, the son of David. We're holding on Daf 68b, Samach Chesed Beis, with the words Katani Miharesha. Katani Miharesha, Hotzi Ubar, Es Yado, Echzira, V'achar Kach, Shachad Es Imo, Mutar Bachila, My Love, Aeber, Lo Aubar. The Gemara explains the challenge to Rav's ruling. In any event, the first clause of the Braita teaches if the fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother's animal's body and then brought it back inside, and then afterward one slaughtered its mother, its consumption is permitted. What is it? Not referring to the limb, meaning the foreleg, and the Braita rules that it is permitted in contradiction to Rav's ruling? The Gemara responds, no, it is referring to the rest of the fetus. I ubar ema seifa shachad es imo v'achar kach hecheziro asur b'achilam v'iubar amai asur. The Gemara questions this. If the Braita is referring to the fetus, say the latter clause, if one first slaughtered its mother, and only afterward the fetus returned its foreleg inside, its consumption is prohibited. The Gemara explains the question. And if it is referring to the fetus, why should it be prohibited in this case? Keze Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Lo nitzrecha ela limkom chatach, hachanami lo nitzrecha ela limkom chatach. The Gemara answers the Braita is referring to the fetus and should be explained in a manner similar to that which Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said. In explanation of a ruling in a Braita cited below, that it is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut limb on the fetus's body, if the foreleg was severed at precisely the point that lay on the boundary between the inside and outside when it was extended outside the womb. The location of the cut on the fetus's body is also prohibited. Here too, one can explain that this ruling is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut, and it teaches that if the fetus did not return its foreleg, then not only is the foreleg prohibited, but the location of the cut is prohibited as well. The foreleg itself, though, is prohibited even if it was brought back inside before the slaughter. Eini ki yasavi mi bechozai asavi aisi masnisa biyadei parasah chazir echol parasah chazir echol mailav echzir parasah echol parasah. The Gemara asks, is that so? But when Avimi came from Bechozai, he came and brought a Braita with him. One of the sources, C69a, that the slaughter of a pregnant animal also serves to permit the consumption of the fetus is a verse, and every animal that has a split hoof and is cloven into two hooves, choose the cut of the animal, you may eat it. Deuteronomy 14:6. The verse mentions both hoof in the singular and hooves in the plural to teach that sometimes one may eat two hooves and sometimes only one. As follows: if the fetus extended two of its hooves outside the womb, if he returned one hoof, one may eat. If it brought back both hooves, one may eat. What is it not that the Braita means that if it brought back one hoof, one may eat that hoof? And likewise, if it brought back two hooves, one may eat both of them, in contradiction to Rav's ruling. Lo, echzir parsa echol ubar, I ubar mai iria hechezir, afiru lo echezir nami. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak lo nitzrecha ela limkom chatach. The Gemara responds, no. It means that if it brought back one hoof, or even both, one may eat the rest of the fetus, but not the hooves. The Gemara objects, if it is referring to the permitted status of the fetus, why does it specifically state that it brought back the hoof, even if it did not bring back the fetus, would be permitted. The fetus would be permitted. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the ruling of the Braita is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut limb on the body of the fetus. If the limb were to be severed at precisely the point that lay on the boundary between the inside and the outside when it was extended outside the womb, then the location of the cut on the fetus's body would also be prohibited. But only the fetus, if the fetus had not brought back that limb before the mother animal was slaughtered. Hatre kroi kad nasiv lav. My love, chad la'ever, echad lemekom chatach, lo, chad lemekom hatach, echad lekalut b'me'ei para. The Gemara persists, but even given Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's claim, the Braita adduces two verses, meaning the mention of hoof and hooves. What is it not that one serves to permit the limb in contradiction to Rav's ruling, and the other one serves to permit the location of the cut in accordance with Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's ruling? The Gemara responds, no. One mention does serve to permit the location of the cut, but the other one serves to permit a fetus with non-cloven hooves, kalut, found inside the womb of a cow that was slaughtered. Although the fetus does not bear the distinguishing characteristics of a kosher species, it nevertheless is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of its mother. And it is necessary to have a specific source to permit this, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As Rabbi Shimon says, a calf with non-cloven hooves born from a kosher cow is forbidden, as the calf does not bear the distinguishing characteristics of a kosher species. The verse teaches that this matter applies only where the fetus emerged into the airspace of the world, meaning it was born before the mother animal was slaughtered. But if it was still inside the mother's womb when the mother was slaughtered, it is permitted. Ula Amar Rav Yochanan Iveras Mamutar. The Gemara attempted to challenge Rav's ruling that once a limb of a fetus is extended outside the mother animal's body, it becomes prohibited, even if it was then brought back, but did not find a conclusive refutation. It now presents a dissenting opinion. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, and even the limb itself is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. Amar le Rav Yehuda le Ula, Yeharav Ushmur de Amri Tarvayu, Evras Moyasur, Amar le Man Yahivlan, Meafra de Rav Ushmuel, Umelainan, Ainin, Ela Lahachi, Amar Yochanan, Akol Hayu, Yechlal Basar Basadir Trefa Lo Tochelu. Rabbi Yehuda said to Ula, but Rav and Shmuel both say the limb itself is prohibited, but how can you say otherwise? Ula said to him, who will give us some of the dust of the graves of Rav and Shmuel, and we will fill our eyes with it? Such is the greatness of those sages. But I follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Initially, one would assume all flesh that is permitted due to being within a certain boundary, for example, a fetus inside its mother's womb, the flesh of offerings of the most sacred order within the temple courtyard, and the flesh of offerings of lesser sanctity within Jerusalem was included in the verse, and flesh in the field, a treifa you shall not eat, Exodus 22:30. The verse is interpreted to teach that if such flesh leaves its boundaries, it is rendered forbidden, even should it subsequently return. Okay. כשפרט לך כתוב, גבי חטא שיצחוס מחיצוס וחזר אסור חטאסו דפת רחמן הבא, אבל כל מלכי ונדהדור שרי. Once another verse applies the concept for you specifically with regard to a sin offering, teaching that If it went outside of its boundary and returned, it is prohibited. See Leviticus 10:18. Then it is apparent that the merciful one specifically applied the concept to a sin offering, but with regard to all other items that left their boundary, once they are brought back, they are permitted, including the limb of a fetus that was extended outside the womb and was brought back. May say basar basada trefilos achelu ma tamro ma lefi shematzino master sheni ubikurim shafal bishiyat chutz mechizasan chazru mutarin yachol avzekein tamloma trefa. The Gemara raised an objection to the opinion of Ula and Rabbi Yochanan from his Braita. It is derived from the verse, and flesh in the field of trefa you shall not eat. That flesh that leaves the boundary in which is permitted is thereby rendered forbidden like a trefa. Why must the verse state that is like a trefa? The Braita explains, since we find, with regard to second tithe and first fruits, that even though they went outside their boundary, which is the city of Jerusalem, and the only place where it is permitted to eat them, nevertheless, if they are brought back there, they are once again permitted. One might have thought that also with regard to this prohibition, that of flesh that leaves its boundary, it is so, meaning if it is brought back, it once again becomes permitted for consumption. Therefore, the first states a trefa. 1 minute, brief break, and be right back after the break with my Talmudah. Okay, we're back, and we're holding by my Talmudah. That's where we stopped before the break. And now we're at my Talmudah. Okay, so my Talmudah, Amar Rabba ketrefa ma trefa kevan shenitr v'shuvin la muheter af basar kevan shiyatza chutz t'mechitza so shuv ein lo heter tiyufta te'ula tiyufta. The Gemara clarifies what is the biblical derivation from the term trefa. Rabbah said the verse indicates that the prohibition of flesh that left its boundary is like the prohibition of a trefa, just as with regard to a trefa, once an animal is mortally wounded, rendering it a trefa, it can no longer regain a permitted status. So too with regard to flesh, referred to in the verse, once it has gone outside of its boundary, it can no longer regain permitted status. Accordingly, if the limb of a fetus was extended outside the womb, it would thereby become permanently prohibited, contradicting the opinion of Ula and Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara concludes, the refutation of the statement of Ula is indeed a conclusive refutation. Amar Mar, lefi shematzinu, b'maser sheni ubikurim, Hechan matzinu. The Gemara analyzes the Braita, which states, the Master said, since we find with regard to the second tithe and first fruits, that although they left their boundary, if they are brought back, they are again permitted. The Gemara asks, where did we find this? Meaning, what is the source for this halacha? To receive. Okay, we're back. Sorry to take a little break. Okay, we're holding by. Where were we holding? Amar Mar, I think it is. Yeah, Amar Mar. The Gemara analyzed the Braita, which states the Master said, since we find, with regard to second tithe and first fruits, that although they left their boundary, if they are brought back, then they are again permitted. The Gemara asks, where do we find this? What is the source of this halacha? The Gemara explains that it is written, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, or of the firstborn of the herd of your flock, nor any of your vows that you have vowed, nor your voluntary offerings, nor the offering of your hand. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 12:17-18. The phrase, the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, is referring to second tithe, and the phrase, the offering of your hands, referring to first fruits. The verse states that all the items listed may be eaten only before the Lord your God meaning within the city of Jerusalem. The prohibition stated in the verse is that within your gates, meaning outside of Jerusalem, you may not eat these items, but by inference, if these items went outside their boundary, meaning outside Jerusalem, and then they were brought back, they are permitted. Okay. Rav Amar yesh leida levorim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ein leida levorim. The Gemara explained the dispute between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan in the way in which he was taught in Babylonia. The Gemara notes that in the West, Eretz Israel, they taught the dispute like this. Rav says there is a concept of birth with regard to limbs. When a limb is extended outside the womb, it is considered born and is independent of the mother animal. Consequently, it can never be permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. Rabbi Yochanan says that there is no concept of birth with regard to limbs. Since the limb is never considered to have been born, as long as it is inside the mother animal, when the mother animal is slaughtered, it will be permitted by virtue of that slaughter. My beinayu, ika beinayu, lemeisal miyute vashibifnim. The Gemara asks, what is the difference between these two versions, which explain why Rav deemed the limb forbidden? The Gemara answers, the practical difference between them is in a case in which only the majority of a limb was extended outside the womb. In that case, the issue is whether or not to prohibit the minority of the limb that remained inside. If the limb is forbidden because it is considered to have been born, the entire limb would be forbidden, and not just the part that was extended. If the limb is forbidden because it left its boundary, then only the part that extended outside the womb would be forbidden. Lerubo mahu miyamrin an hanafakle uroi dilma kevin hadar hadar. A dilemma was raised before the sages, according to the statement of the one who says that there is no concept of birth with regard to the limbs. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside the womb and brought it back, and again it extended its other foreleg outside and brought it back, and continued to extend parts of its body outside until the total amount that had been outside the womb constitute the majority of the fetus, what is the halacha? Do we say that ultimately the majority of the fetus has left the womb and the entire fetus should be regarded as having been born, and consequently the slaughter of its mother can no longer permit its being consumed? Or perhaps, since it brought each limb back, the limbs are considered to have been brought back, therefore the majority of the fetus is not considered to have left the womb, and it is not regarded as having been born. In that case, the slaughter of its mother would still permit it being consumed. The Gemara asks, if you want to say that since it brought back each limb, they are considered to have been brought back, the majority of the fetus is not considered to have left the womb, the following dilemma still arises. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside, and someone severed it, and again it extended its other foreleg outside, and someone severed it, and it's continued with its other limbs until the total amount outside the womb constitute the majority of the fetus, what is the halacha? Do we say that since the majority of the fetus has left the womb, the entire fetus should be regarded as having been born, and therefore the slaughter of its mother can no longer permit it? Or perhaps, in order for the fetus to be regarded as having been born, we require the majority of the fetus to leave simultaneously, which does not exist in this case. Tashima, the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof from the Mishnah.